The challenges of life cultivate us. Grace and peace, everybody. Welcome to Sabbath School Study Group. My name is Chris Bailey. Welcome. It's good to be here and glad that you are here as we're looking at the challenges of the land here. Part number 2 of this 5-part series. As we try to understand the context of the land, what lessons can we learn from the giving of land? This is God's promise. We're on the road here on the land of Southwestern Adventist University, and glad that we're able to take this place and use it as a backdrop for what God wants to do in your promised land. When the school was established, someone had to have a vision before they became a building. Someone had to have an idea before it became a reality. Well, what's God's idea for your reality? Well, it's to understand that the cultivation of your character, the cultivation, what makes us pure as gold, is a refining process. And that refinement, as we see here in the lesson, is going to have 2 purposes. One, to improve us. And wherever there is a limit on the capacity to improve, then God will just start over in order to prepare us for something brand new. So thank you for watching. If this is encouraging you, we appreciate you. Hit that like button on this video, subscribe to the channel, and pass this on to someone else. And we'd love to come where you are. If you want that to happen, just send us an email. That email address is contact@changeministry.org. In Joshua chapter 13, beginning in verse number 1, it says, "Now Joshua was old and stricken in years, and the Lord said unto him, Thou art old and stricken in years, and there remaineth yet very much land to be possessed." There was a blessing in Joshua's, the gift of life that he had. Being old and well stricken in years, that was a blessing. That was a gift. That was a sign of his faithfulness to God and the fact that he didn't perish in the wilderness. But at the same time, and beyond that, there was a lot of land to be possessed. There was a lot of work to be done. So God was saying that you're in promise, but there's still a process. And sometimes when we think that once we've received or we're in God's promise, that means that there's no more process. In other words, there's no more cultivation that has to happen. And they will even say, or will doubt that because we're being cultivated, then I must not be converted. No, it's the very opposite. It's because of conversion that we actually put ourselves in a position for God to cultivate the land of our heart, to cultivate who we are. So when you keep reading in Joshua chapter 13, it says in verse 13, "Nevertheless, the children of Israel expelled not the Girgashites, nor the Maacathites, but the Gershishites and the Maacathites dwell among the Israelites until this day." Isn't that amazing? The lights just came on as we're in the Word. Because when you open the Word, that's what happens. The light comes on. And the light that God wants us to see is that he now begins this process. It goes to a whole nother level of promise. It's still promise, but it's also process to where they're fighting, to where they're evicting, to where they're removing things. In other words, they're improving the promised land by becoming now residents of the promised land, but then they're also preparing the land and removing at the same time. So what am I saying? One of the reasons that you know that you are growing is that you have new problems. You know how when James says, "Count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations," that's the sign of a sanctified life. If you are dealing with the same old sins, SOS, that's a sign that you're circling. But when we are cycling up, when we are growing in process, we will go from one battle to another, and then from one victory to another victory. But you can't expect victory without battle. That's the whole context of the Christian life. So we're growing into new challenges. So yeah, no one is saying like, yay, I'm so glad I'm in challenges. But when you know you're facing something new, then that means you've turned a page. That means God has elevated you, and now you're improving and becoming more and more like him. One more verse, and it's here in Joshua 13:22, where it says, "Balaam also, the son of Beor, the soothsayer, did the children of Israel slay with the sword among them that were slain by them." Ouch. Remember the story of Balaam? Balaam who sold his soul for some gold. He had an encounter with a donkey. God was so wanted to turn his life around that he used a donkey to try to speak to him, because he used a mule to try to break through with a mule. Well, he did not break through because Balaam refused to believe. And because of that, Balaam died. But what does that tell us? It tells us that sometimes the very things that are valuable, those very sins that are sacred to us, are the very things that he wants to take from us. Balaam was in love with money. That was his issue. That was his Gibraltar. That was his rock. And because of it, he actually died on that rock. But Jesus also said that it would be better to fall on the rock and be broken than for the rock to fall on us to break us. God wants to break us from the things that don't just easily beset us, but the things that burden him. I'm talking about deliverance. Jesus is talking about deliverance. The gospel is all about deliverance. It is being born again, not to live the same old life, but to live a new life. If you want this, you can have this. In fact, this blessing is more sure than getting a blessing of 1,000 acres or 10,000 cattle, because every spiritual blessing is guaranteed to be answered, not in the life to come, but right now. That's what God was using the literal land to illustrate. I'm giving you this land to show you what I can give you in your heart.